The wind clawed at the high cliffs of the Elburz Mountains long before dawn. A cold that felt almost alive crept through the leather armor of the young fida'i as he tightened the strap across his chest. He had trained for years inside the stone corridors of Alamut, but this night felt different. He could hear his own heartbeat echoing like a drum in the narrow mountain pass. Below him, the world was still a black ocean of shifting valleys. Somewhere in that darkness lay the Seljuk camp, its torches flickering like scattered embers. Their general slept under heavy guard, convinced the steep cliffs protected him from any surprise attack. But the Hashishin had no need for armies, nor for open war. They lived in the shadows, in silence, in secrets history rarely recorded correctly. "Breathe," whispered the Da'i standing behind him. "The mountain listens to those who tremble." The young fida'i exhaled slowly. The night carried the faint rustle of distant banners, the clink of armor far below. A thin dusting of snow cracked beneath his sandals. "You know your mission." "Yes, master." "You know your fate." He didn't answer. Every fida'i understood the same truth. Whether he returned or not mattered little. Only the completion of the mission did. From far above, a hawk's cry cut through the wind, its silhouette briefly crossing the moon. For a moment, everything fell silent. Then came the low rumble of distant horns echoing from the Seljuk camp. A change of guards. Perfect timing. The Da'i stepped closer. "Your life," he whispered, "belongs to the cause, but your courage belongs to you alone." A torch hissed below as it was extinguished. The world darkened slightly. The fida'i gripped the cold rock face and began his descent. Each movement was calculated. Fingers searching for cracks, toes balancing on slivers of stone, breath steady like the rhythm of a slow drum. His dagger, forged in the workshops of Alamut and polished until it shone like a sliver of moonlight, hung by his side. It felt heavier than usual tonight. Halfway down, he paused. Voices rose from the camp, muffled, irritated. "Keep your eyes open," one guard snarled. "The Ismaili rats crawl these mountains." Another laughed. "No one can come from up there. Even goats wouldn't attempt it." The fida'i's lips curved slightly. If only they knew. He reached the lower ledge, crouched behind a boulder, and listened. The fire crackled. The guards shifted their feet. The cloth canopy over the general's tent flapped like wings. Beyond that, he could hear men snoring, the soft, steely ring of a soldier adjusting his scabbard, a distant horse stamping. Every sound crafted the battlefield inside his mind. He timed his movements with the wind, stepping only when the gusts were strong enough to mask the crunch of gravel. One guard turned. The fida'i froze. Another gust. He moved. A torch flickered violently, smoke curling upward. Shadows danced across the tents. He slipped behind a wooden cart, slid silently past two guards sharing a wineskin, and approached the largest tent in the camp, the general's. Its entrance was guarded by two elite soldiers, their spears crossed. He lowered his hand to the small pouch at his belt. Inside was fine powder, colorless, scentless. He waited for the wind again. When it came, he blew the powder gently toward the guards. Their conversation slowed. Their eyes fluttered. One swayed as if drunk. The other tried to speak, but his tongue felt suddenly heavy. They slumped forward without a sound. The fida'i stepped over them and slipped inside. The general lay on a thick rug, snoring like a bear. Maps and scrolls lay scattered beside him, marked routes of planned raids into Nazari territory. His helmet glimmered faintly in the lamplight. The fida'i approached with silent feet. This was not murder. This was war in a form the world rarely understood. A message, a correction of balance. A necessary act in a time where entire villages were burned for the choices of their leaders. He leaned over the general, raising the dagger. A faint sound abruptly sliced the silence, a boot scraping outside the tent. His heart kicked against his chest. Another guard approaching. Someone checking the post. The fida'i hesitated for half a breath. The window for escape was narrowing. A whisper inside him said, "Take the risk." Another whisper said, "Wait, wait, wait." The tent flap rustled. A shadow stretched across the ground. The fida'i struck. The dagger slid between the ribs, finding the heart in one practiced motion. The general's eyes snapped open, but no scream emerged. Only a wet gas escaped before his body sagged back. The fida'i withdrew the blade, wiped it on the man's robe, and stepped back into the shadows of the tent as the guard outside called softly, "Halim, why are you asleep again, you useless?" The flap opened. The fida'i held his breath. The guard stared at the two unconscious soldiers on the ground, then glanced inside. The lantern flame flickered. He stepped in cautiously. A faint metallic sound escaped as the fida'i shifted his weight. The guard spun. Too late. The dagger reached his throat before he could shout. The fida'i dragged the body aside, extinguished the lantern, and listened for alarms. None came yet. He slipped out, hugging the shadows, racing toward the mountain trail. A dog barked somewhere behind him. A horn blared suddenly. Another. Shouts erupted. The general. Alarm. Alarm. The entire valley lit up with torches. Arrows flew wild into darkness as the camp descended into chaos. The fida'i reached the rocky ascent just as torches gathered below. He's climbing. Stop him. A spear clattered against the cliff near his foot. An arrow sliced the air past his ear. Then another. He climbed faster, fingers tearing against jagged stone, lungs burning, legs screaming, but the mountain felt alive beneath him, pulling him upward. The horns below grew louder. He reached the ridge, collapsed for a moment, then forced himself to his feet. A hand caught his shoulder. He spun, only to see the da'i standing there, calm as the moon. "Your courage," the master whispered, "has honored the mountain." Far below, the Seljuk camp roared with fury, but the fida'i felt only stillness. The first light of dawn broke over the horizon, painting the world gold. He had survived, but this was only the beginning. The sun had barely crested the distant ridges when the scouts of Alamut returned with grim news. The Seljuk retaliation had begun sooner than expected, fast, brutal, and wide-reaching. Villages aligned with the Nizari cause were already being harassed, their grain stores burned, their elders arrested under accusations of treachery. The air in Alamut's council chamber felt heavy, thick with tension, as if the mountain itself were holding its breath. The fida'i who had returned from the mission knelt in silence before the dais. His cloak was still dusted with mountain soil, his hands rough from the climb, his eyes tired but steady. Hassanai Sabah, the old man of the mountain, stood beside a narrow window slit, watching the wind sweep across the valley below. "Rise," he said finally. The fida'i stood. "You have done what was required," Hassan continued, voice calm but sharp as cut stone. "But the consequences will be felt across the land. The Seljuks will answer your strike with fire. Their arrogance demands that they respond with show of strength." A murmur spread among the council members. Some were uneasy. Others wore expressions of solemn approval. The fida'i bowed his head. "I accepted that cost, my lord, and your acceptance honors you," Hassan responded. "But now, we must prepare for what follows." Outside, the sound of horns echoed across the valley, training horns, not alarm calls. In the courtyard below, dozens of young recruits moved in tightly coordinated patterns, practicing evasion, stealth, and reflexive knife strikes. Their sandals whispered against the stone tiles. Their breaths were measured, controlled. A group of senior fida'i observed them, arms crossed, eyes scanning for weakness. Every mistake was corrected instantly. Every hesitation was challenged. Alamut was not simply a fortress. It was a crucible, a place where discipline and purpose molded boys into instruments sharper than any blade. The returning fida'i felt a familiar pang of memory as he watched them. He remembered standing on those very stones years ago, barefoot, exhausted, terrified of failing. Now, he was the one they looked up to, though none dared show it. A shadow passed overhead. A falcon descended onto a perch near the council chamber entrance, a message scroll bound to its leg. A guard retrieved it and rushed inside, bowing as he offered it to Hassan. The old man unrolled the parchment, eyes narrowing slightly. "A Seljuk detachment marches toward Rudbar," he announced. 200 soldiers. They aim to seize our grain supply lines. The fida'i felt his pulse quicken. A counselor spoke up, voice uncertain. "We should send riders to warn the villagers." and risk the detachment splitting and attacking multiple points, another countered. We cannot be everywhere at once. Hassan raised a hand. We won't chase them, he said. We will redirect them. The room fell silent as he stepped forward, his gaze settling on the fida'i who had completed the general's assassination. You will lead a team of 3, he said. Your task is not to destroy the Seljuk detachment. It is to make them believe a larger force lies ahead. His eyes glinted with a faint spark of strategy. Fear is a more efficient weapon than steel. The fida'i bowed. Who will join me? Hassan motioned toward the doorway. 2 figures entered first. Idris, a wiry scout with eyes sharp as needles, and Bayan, a strong, stoic warrior whose silence often spoke louder than words. But a third figure followed, unexpected, unfamiliar, a woman in dark traveling clothes, her hair braided tightly behind her head, her expression unreadable. She carried no visible weapons, yet there was a tension in her stance that suggested she could strike faster than most men. This is Zara, Hassan said, a messenger of our allied sections. For this mission, she is your voice. What you see, she will report. What you decide, she will confirm. The fida'i exchanged a brief glance with her. Zara's eyes held a firmness he recognized, someone who had seen violence and chosen not to look away. Hassan folded his hands behind his back. You must intercept the Seljuks before they reach Rudbar. Turn them aside. Confuse them. Break their sense of direction. Show them shadows where there are none. And if they discover us? Idris asked. Then, Hassan said, you survive long enough to ensure the villagers have time to flee. No illusion of glory. No pretense of safety. Just cold, calculated purpose. That evening, the 4 operatives departed Alamut. They moved through narrow mountain paths, passing rows of terraced fields and stone huts where farmers paused in their work to bow respectfully. Zara rode ahead at times, scouting alternate routes, while Idris read the land like a man reading an old friend's face. As night approached, the sky darkened into shades of violet and deep blue. Crickets chirped. The wind whispered through juniper trees. In the distance, the faint glow of torches marked the line of the advancing Seljuk detachment. They set up an observation point on a ridge, overlooking the valley path. From there, the fida'i watched the soldiers march, shields gleaming, spears upright, horses snorting under their riders. The Seljuks moved with discipline, confidence, and the arrogance of men who believe themselves unstoppable. Zara knelt beside the fida'i. They are well supplied, she murmured, and confident. That confidence is what we'll use against them, he replied. Bayan approached silently, holding a bundle of small clay pots. Smoke pots, he said simply. They burn fast and bright, perfect for illusions. Idris grinned. And with the right placement, we can make them think the entire hillside is full of hidden soldiers. The fida'i surveyed the terrain. Narrow pass, dense brush, steep drop to the east, plenty of shadows, plenty of angles. We start at dawn, he said. The team dispersed to prepare. As the first hints of morning light brushed the horizon, the fida'i took one last look at the approaching army. Hundreds of armored men, banners flying, horses pawing at the ground. A force that could crush a village in minutes. And he had only 3 companions. He closed his eyes and steadied his breath. We need only one advantage, he whispered to himself. The mountain listens and it answers. The Seljuks advanced. The trap was ready. The first rays of dawn sliced across the valley, turning the Seljuk helmets into glinting shards of silver. From the ridge, the fida'i could hear the steady rhythm of marching boots, the deep, synchronized thump of disciplined soldiers confident in their numbers. Dust curled behind them like a trailing banner. They were close now, too close. Idris crouched beside a cluster of rocks, fingers tightening a knot on a length of rope attached to one of the clay smoke pots. Once we light it, he whispered, we'll have only seconds before the smoke spreads. Bayan stood farther down the slope, half hidden by an outcrop, ready to ignite another. Zara watched the approaching column through narrowed eyes. They don't expect danger this early, she murmured. They think fear runs from their banners. It does, the fida'i answered softly. But not today. He waited for the precise moment. Timing mattered more than strength, more than courage, even more than skill. When the Seljuk vanguard reached the narrowest point of the pass, the fida'i signaled with 2 quick clicks of his tongue, barely audible against the rustling wind. Idris lit the first pot. A thick plume of smoke erupted upward, swirling violently in the morning breeze, taking on the shape of rising shadows. The Seljuk soldiers froze. Horses reared, snorting anxiously. "What is that?" a commander barked. Before anyone could answer, Bayan's pot ignited, closer, larger, releasing a flare-like flash within the smoke. "Ambush!" someone shouted. In an instant, the disciplined march disintegrated. Shields rose, spears angled, archers scrambled for arrows. The sound of clashing metal erupted, though no enemy had yet appeared. Zara, hiding behind a cluster of shrubs, threw 2 small mirrors toward the opposite ridge. They landed silently among the rocks. When sunlight struck them, brief flashes dazzled the Seljuk soldiers. "Archers on the ridge," a lieutenant yelled, but there were no archers, only illusions. Idris tugged sharply on the rope, pulling the pot down the slope. The smoke trail snaked along the ground, giving the impression of movement of many, more shadows, more figures that didn't exist. The Seljuk commander, face flushed with panic, rode forward. "Hold your lines. Regroup." Another flash, another smoke plume, then the echo of a whistle, a sound carefully mimicked by Bayan to resemble a signal between hidden units. The soldiers faltered again. "What valley force moves without showing its banners?" a bewildered archer asked. "They're everywhere," another muttered. "They're nowhere," Zara whispered to herself. The fida'i moved along the ridge until he reached a vantage point directly above the Seljuk officers. He cupped his hands around his mouth and called out in a clear, commanding voice that bounced off the valley walls. "Fall back. You walk into death." The echo repeated his words across the cliffs, 3 times, for as though an entire army were shouting them. Some soldiers looked to the hills, others behind them. Confusion cracked their unity like a blade splitting wood. But not all were fooled. The Seljuk commander raised his hand, steadying his horse. His eyes combed the landscape, sharp and unyielding. "These tricks, these shadows, this is no army," he growled. "This is the work of Alamut." A few soldiers flinched at the name. Others tightened their grips on their spears. He pointed forward. "We march. Push through. Don't fear the mountain." Before he could finish, a horse reared violently, terrified by another smoke burst. The commander lost his balance for a heartbeat. His grip loosened. His horse lunged sideways. It was all the time the fida'i needed. He threw a small clay sphere down from a ridge. It shattered near the officers, releasing a blinding white burst, harmless, but shocking. Horses panicked. Officers ducked. The commander cursed and shielded his face. For several chaotic seconds, the entire column halted in a tangled mass of men and beasts. Zara seized the moment. She let out a sharp whistle, high, slicing to the panicked noise. Idris repeated it from another location. Bayan repeated it from yet another. 3 directions, 3 signals, 3 invisible units. "Retreat! We are surrounded," one soldier cried. It was a final fracture. The Seljuk column began pulling back, not in orderly formation, but in a ragged, stumbling retreat. Men shouted, tripped over one another, dropped spears, abandoned supply carts. Horses bucked and bolted. Officers yelled themselves hoarse, trying to regain control. But the illusion had taken root too deeply. Fear had become tangible. Heavy. True. The Seljuk force withdrew down the valley path, abandoning their push toward Rudbar. Zara let out a long breath. Idris collapsed backward onto ground, laughing breathlessly. Bayan nodded once, satisfied. The fida'i watched the retreating column until they disappeared beyond the bend in the valley. But his expression didn't relax. His eyes remained sharp. Zara noticed. "Something troubles you." "They retreated too easily," he murmured. "A disciplined army can break, but it can also regroup." "You think they'll return?" "I think they will report to someone who learned from their mistakes," he replied. "And when they return, they won't fall for shadows. He glanced back toward the mountain peaks. "Next time," he said, "they'll bring fire." Zara looked toward the horizon, where a thin trail of dust still lingered. "Then we will answer with stone," she whispered. They began gathering the remnants of their tools, preparing to move before scouts could return. But as they packed, Idris paused and pointed toward the distant ridge. "Do you see that?" Bayan narrowed his eyes. A rider alone. The solitary figure galloped hard, heading straight toward them. Dust flew behind him in a long plume. His horse moved with frantic urgency. The fida'i stepped forward, hand ready at his belt. When the rider came close enough, he shouted hoarsely, "Alamut sends warning." The horse staggered to a stop, sides heaving. The rider swayed in the saddle, breath ragged, eyes wild with fear and exhaustion. "What happened?" Zara demanded. The messenger swallowed hard, voice trembling. "The Seljuks, they have summoned reinforcements. Thousands. They march not for Rudbar." His eyes locked onto Fides. "They march for Alamut." A cold wind cut through the valley. The mountains seemed to fall silent. The words hung in the air like a curse. Thousands marching toward Alamut. The fida'i felt the weight of the mountains press against his shoulders. Every ridge, every cliffside he had climbed so many times now seemed impossibly small compared to the army advancing through the valleys below. Dawn's soft light could not warm the chill that raced through him. Bayan's hands tightened on the hilt of his sword. "Thousands," he muttered. "We're only 3 for counting Zara. We're not here to meet them in open battle." The fida'i replied, voice low and steady. "The mountain is our weapon. Fear is ours to wield. We slow them, break them, turn them on each other." Zara scanned the horizon, eyes narrowing. "But they won't hesitate. Not this time. The Seljuks know what we are capable of. They'll strike the villages first, cut off our supplies. This could be the end of Alamut itself." He shook his head. "Not yet." Every step the enemy took toward the mountain increased the urgency, but also the clarity of their purpose. He had lived under the walls of Alamut, trained under Hassan's gaze, studied the ancient scrolls of strategy, learned to become invisible yet deadly. This was what all that preparation had led to. The fida'i led the team along a hidden path that wound like a serpent up the cliffs. From this vantage, they could see the Seljuk armies slowly coalescing in the valley below, flags fluttering, dust rising like a signal to the gods. The sound of distant horns began to carry up the slopes, signaling coordination among their advancing forces. Idris stopped suddenly. They're splitting into columns. Half are moving through the western pass, half through the eastern. They'll surround the villages and then converge here. The fida'i crouched behind a boulder. "Good. That's what we want. We'll use one column to lure the other into confusion. Shadows, echoes, and fire. They will think the mountain is full of warriors, not rocks and trees." Bayan scowled. "You make it sound easy. You think they'll fall for the same trick twice." "They won't," the fida'i said grimly. "But we don't need perfection. We only need delay. Enough delay to buy time for those who cannot fight." Zara pointed to a narrow gorge below them. "If we ignite the brush here, the smoke will rise and funnel their attention toward the east. They'll think the path is mined, or worse, that hidden soldiers await them." The fida'i nodded. "And once they hesitate, we create chaos. Spears, firepots, loud whistles, sudden shadows. Make them think the mountain itself rises against them." Night fell swiftly, and the team moved into position. They planted pots of burning resin along ledges, arranged fallen branches to mimic bodies, scattered rocks to suggest movement. Zara whispered coordinates to Idris in a language older than the mountains themselves. Every motion was precise, rehearsed, necessary. The rhythm of their preparation matched the steady drum of their own hearts. As darkness thickened, distant torches appeared in the valley, the first Seljuk column approaching. The wind shifted, carrying smoke from the nearby ridges. Horses whinnied. The fida'i felt his pulse synchronize with the wind. Shadows grew and twisted, creating illusions that multiplied their numbers. From below came a shout. "By Allah! They are everywhere. How can we see them?" The fida'i smiled faintly. He could almost hear Hassan's voice in the wind, The mountain listens, and it answers. Another shout pierced the night. A Seljuk officer rode forward, torch in hand, trying to illuminate the supposed attackers. The fida'i tossed a small clay sphere down the cliff. It burst into a dazzling white flash. Horses bolted, soldiers flailed, and chaos erupted. But this time, the Seljuks adapted. They were not simple men. They were trained, organized, relentless. They spread out, sending scouts and moving cautiously. The fida'i's heart thudded harder. Each step of the enemy tested their strategy, their patience, their nerve. Zara's voice broke the tense silence. They found one of our paths. They'll climb the ridge if we do nothing. Then we do nothing. The fida'i said calmly. We wait for the slope to guide them into fear. Minutes passed like hours. Torches flickered in the darkness, casting monstrous shapes against the cliffs. A horse screamed. A man fell, tripping over a carefully placed rock. Another screamed as he thought shadows were soldiers. The fida'i watched, his breath slow, his mind calculating the next move. Suddenly, a loud horn sounded from the valley below. Reinforcements had arrived earlier than expected. The Seljuks were regrouping, tightening their formation. Their commander's voice rose, commanding, cutting through the chaos. Do not fear. Strike as one. The fida'i clenched his teeth. The illusion alone would not hold them for long. It was time to act. He gestured to Idris and Bayan. Smoke pots flared, rocks tumbled, whistles shrieked. Shadows seemed to rise and move. The Seljuks hesitated, then faltered, some retreating slightly, others freezing in fear. But the enemy's commander was no fool. He spurred his horse forward, shouting orders, rallying his troops, breaking the momentary panic. The fida'i's jaw tightened. The first wave of illusion had worked, but the true challenge was only beginning. Above the valley, the wind carried a note of warning. A new day had begun. The battle was no longer a simple trick. It was now a war of nerves, cunning, and survival. Every move mattered. Every heartbeat counted. The fida'i drew a slow breath and whispered to himself, Alamut will not fall today, not while we still draw breath. In the valley below, the Seljuks hesitated, their confidence shaken but not destroyed. And high above, the mountain waited, watching, listening, ready to answer with every shadow, every echo, every silent strike. The sun rose higher, pale and unforgiving, casting the Seljuk army into sharp relief against the valley floor. Their movements were more cautious now, their banners stiff and tense as they marched in wary columns. Smoke from the fida'i's previous distraction still lingered in pockets, curling like ghosts across the slopes. The illusions had bought precious time, but the mountain's patience was finite. The fida'i crouched behind a jagged rock, fingers brushing over the worn leather of his dagger. Beside him, Idris adjusted a set of ropes tied to clay pots filled with burning resin, ready to unleash another wave of smoke. Bayan silently checked the sharp edges of his throwing knives, each one gleaming faintly in the morning light. Zara studied the army below, calculating distance, timing, and wind patterns. They are regrouping, she said quietly. Their formation is tighter. They have scouts moving ahead, watching for traps. The fida'i nodded. Good. That means they're predictable. Fear is easier when men think they have control. Minutes passed in tense silence. Then, from the eastern ridge, a single scout horse appeared, a lone figure galloping recklessly, likely to investigate the smoke and shadows from the previous night. The fida'i's lips curved slightly. Timing. Opportunity. Idris lit the first smoke pot and sent it tumbling down the slope. The resin ignited instantly, sending thick, choking clouds spiraling upward. The scout reared in terror, misjudging the terrain, and crashed into a cluster of rocks. A shout rang out from the Seljuk army below, confusion rippling through the ranks. Bayan stepped forward, hurling knives with unerring precision. The first struck a rider in the shoulder. The horse stumbled, throwing him into the dust. The second knife clipped a shield strap, causing the man to stumble and topple over. Pandemonium began to spread like wildfire. The fida'i climbed a narrow outcrop to a vantage point, scanning the valley below. Soldiers hesitated. Arrows flew blindly, and the Seljuk commander's voice cut across the chaos, attempting to restore order. but his eyes betrayed doubt. He had seen shadows move where there were no men, heard whistles and cries echoing from cliffs that held no voice. Zara whispered urgently, "They will try to flank us from the western pass. If they break through, the villages will burn." The fida'i's gaze sharpened. Then we prepare a second illusion. More smoke, more echoes, more shadows. They move with fluid precision, planting resin pots along the new path, pulling rocks to simulate soldiers advancing, and placing mirrors to reflect the sun into the eyes of the approaching scouts. Each movement was silent, deliberate, rehearsed countless times in the training halls of Alamut. As the Seljuks approached the western ridge, they hesitated. Smoke spiraled from below. Bright sunlight caught in shards of mirrors, and the sound of distant whistles carried down the valley. The army slowed, uncertainty spreading like frost over their ranks. A Seljuk officer called out, "Hold, advance carefully. Do not charge blindly." From their hidden positions, the fida'i and his companions watched as fear began to fracture the enemy's coordination. Horses shied away from imagined threats. Soldiers tripped over rocks that seemed to move under the weight of shadows. The mountain itself seemed alive, pressing down with invisible hands. Then the Seljuk commander acted. He rode forward, sword raised, shouting orders, attempting to steady his men. But each command was met with hesitation, confusion, and doubt. Even his most disciplined soldiers faltered. The fida'i signaled to Idris and Bayan. More pots tumbled down the cliffside, bursts of smoke and flashes of white fire breaking the soldiers' rhythm. The illusion of a larger force became nearly real in the minds of the enemy. Zara moved silently, weaving between rocks to plant additional mirrors. Sunlight glinted off them, creating the appearance of spears and armor where there was none. Screams and shouts echoed across the valley, amplified by the cliffs, adding to the chaos. From their vantage point, the fida'i could see the Seljuk army splintering. A small group attempted to push forward, only to be forced back by smoke and panicked horses. Another unit misinterpreted shadows as a larger attack and withdrew entirely. "They are losing cohesion," the fida'i muttered. "Good. Let them fracture further." Hours passed in this tense dance. The army, confident and formidable in the morning, now moved like a wounded animal, careful, fragmented, fearful. Every step they took was uncertain. Every breath they drew weighed heavy with suspicion of hidden threats. Finally, the Seljuk commander, realizing the western pass was untenable, signaled a retreat back toward the valley center. He tightened ranks, forced control, and the army began to pull back, cursing and shouting. The fida'i allowed himself a brief sigh. They had bought time, slowed the advance, and protected countless villagers. But he knew this was only temporary. Reinforcements would continue to arrive. The Seljuks would not abandon their campaign easily. Zara approached, eyes dark with concern. This will not hold them forever. They will adapt, and next time they will not be so easily deceived. The fida'i nodded, scanning the valley below, every ridge and slope memorized. Then we must prepare for the next illusion. The mountain will answer again. We will delay them, fight them in shadows, and survive. Bayan sheathed his knives and whispered, "They underestimate the mountain, and that will be their mistake." The wind picked up, sweeping over the cliffs and through the hidden paths. The fida'i inhaled deeply, feeling the weight of Alamut on his shoulders, the legacy of the order coursing through him. Every rock, every tree, every shadow was an ally. Every heartbeat, a weapon. The Seljuks were still below, regrouping, readying for another push. But for now, the mountain had claimed victory, invisible and silent. And high above, the fida'i knew the dance of survival had only just begun. The morning haze lingered in the valley like a lingering breath, softening the edges of the Seljuk army as they regrouped, muttering and cursing, unaware of the eyes watching from above. The fida'i crouched behind a ridge, scanning the ranks, calculating each movement, each hesitation. Every man in the enemy formation was now a potential instrument for illusion, a pawn to be redirected with smoke, sound, and shadow. Zara knelt beside him, pointing toward a thin column breaking off from the main army. "They're sending a scouting party toward the northern ravine," she said. "If they discover our paths, the entire operation could collapse." The fida'i's eyes narrowed. Then we must intercept them, not with force, but with fear. Make them question what they see. Make them doubt their own senses. Bayan adjusted the clay pots strapped to his belt. I can handle the smoke, but I need to be closer. Up there, he said, pointing to a narrow ledge jutting above the ravine. I can create the illusion of soldiers descending on them. Idris nodded, climbing silently along the rocks to position himself for optimal effect. I'll flank the other side. They'll think they're surrounded from all angles. The fida'i and Zara remain in the central vantage point, coordinating signals with subtle gestures. Whistles, reflections, and carefully timed rockfalls would orchestrate the panic. Every detail mattered. Every second could determine whether the army would collapse or regroup. The scouting party entered the ravine, small and confident. They moved in tight formation, unaware that the fida'i's shadowed eyes followed their every step. Bayan struck first, tossing a pot down the slope. Smoke erupted, twisting and curling upward. Shadows danced across the ravine walls. The scouts froze, glancing at one another. A rock tumbled down from Idris's side, a clatter that echoed, startling the horses. The soldiers turned, seeing shadows stretch along the cliff faces, shapes that seemed to advance upon them. Ambush! Soldiers above, one of the scouts shouted, but no one was there. Only the mountain, only shadows. Bayan hurled a knife into a wooden post near the scouts, sending it crashing to the ground. Horses bolted in panic. Soldiers stumbled, some falling over rocks, others tripping over their own feet. Fear, like a contagion, spread instantly. The fida'i leaned closer to Zara. We are not killers today. We are instruments of doubt. Let them unravel themselves. The scouts turned, trying to regroup, but the mountain whispered lies at every turn. Smoke, light, echoes, all synchronized, all deliberate. The illusion of a massive force had become nearly tangible. Then the lead scout drew his sword and shouted, "Form ranks! We are not afraid." But even as he spoke, his own men wavered. Shadows moved where there was no movement. Whistles carried from unseen cliffs. Rocks tumbled with the sound of footfalls. Panic was no longer avoidable. The fida'i signaled Idris and Bayan simultaneously. Another round of clay pots exploded into thick, suffocating smoke. Mirrors reflected sunlight into the eyes of the scouts, causing sudden missteps and disarray. From above, Zara shouted instructions, her voice carrying with the wind. Drive them toward the western cliffs. Make them retreat toward the center. Do not let them regroup in the ravine. The scouts stumbled, shouting orders. Tried to reform, but the panic was infectious. One horse slipped on loose gravel, throwing its rider into the dust. A second soldier tripped over fallen branches, landing hard against a rock. Each disruption multiplied the sense of chaos, turning the illusion into a living, breathing threat. Finally, the remaining scouts fled toward the central column of the Seljuk army, spreading tales of impossible soldiers, shadows that moved on their own, and the mountain alive with unseen warriors. Fear had done what steel alone could not. The fida'i descended the ridge carefully, joining Bayan and Idris. Their coordinated effort had delayed the advance yet again, but the air was thick with tension. The main army was still in the valley, and the reinforcements were growing nearer. Zara looked toward the horizon. They'll adapt next time. Their commander won't make the same mistakes twice. The fida'i nodded, eyes scanning the distant horizon where dust and smoke signaled more troops arriving. Then we must prepare for them. Every ridge, every cliff, every shadow becomes our weapon. We fight with what they cannot see, what they cannot anticipate. Bayan exhaled slowly. I thought fear was simple to wield, but this is more exhausting than any fight with steel. The fida'i allowed himself a brief smile. That is the cost of survival. That is the way of Alamut. Every battle does not require swords. Sometimes it requires patience, cunning, and the courage to let the mountain fight for us. They paused, listening to the distant rhythm of the army as it moved, clattering and shouting in the valley below. The mountain held its silence, its patience, its secret strength, and high above, the fida'i understood that the true battle had only just begun. The sun climbed higher, painting the valley in shades of gold and harsh white. The Seljuk army, though fragmented and hesitant, pressed forward with renewed determination. From above, the fida'i could see the banners ripple in the wind, each one a promise of death to the villages below if they were not stopped. Every instinct honed at Alamut told him that the next few hours would define the survival of their people. Bayan adjusted the straps of his satchel, ensuring the remaining clay pots were secure. "They've learned from the last illusions," he said, voice low. "They'll be wary now. Subtle tricks won't be enough." The fida'i nodded. "Then we escalate. Smoke alone is not enough. We need sound, movement, and the weight of the unseen." Zara stepped closer, her eyes sweeping the valley floor. "I've calculated their path. If we collapse the eastern ravine, it will force their center column to halt and divide. That buys more time and buys fear into their hearts." Idris frowned. "A rock slide? The risk is high. One miscalculation, and we're trapped with them." The fida'i shook his head. "Risk is our ally. Courage is not the absence of fear, but action in spite of it. The mountain listens to us. It will guide our hands." They moved swiftly along narrow paths, positioning themselves for the maneuver. The eastern ravine stretched below, tight and treacherous, a natural funnel for any army attempting to pass. They placed large boulders carefully, testing small slides to ensure the right noise, the right dust, and the right illusion of a collapsing path. The first Seljuk scouts appeared at the entrance to the ravine, cautious and suspicious. The fida'i signaled to Idris and Bayan. A single rope tugged, a boulder tumbled, and dust erupted like a thundercloud. The scouts froze, eyes wide with fear, thinking the mountain itself was rejecting them. A loud whistle echoed from the ridge. The sound carried unnaturally, amplified by the cliffs. Soldiers turned, searching for the source. Some began to pull back, while others hesitated, caught between orders and instinctual terror. "Now!" the fida'i whispered. Bayan sent several smoke pots cascading down the slope. Flames and dark smoke twisted into shapes of armored men, climbing the cliffs, brandishing weapons. The scouts panicked, retreating toward the main column, shouting warnings of invisible warriors. The main army reacted immediately. Confusion spread as rumors of unseen enemies reached their ears. Horses reared, men stumbled, and the once disciplined formations began to falter. Zara guided the fida'i to another vantage point. "If we push this right, the center column will hesitate. They'll think the entire eastern slope is defended." The fida'i studied the troops below. A single moment of hesitation was all it took. He cupped his hand around his mouth and shouted, voice carrying across the cliffs, "Fall back! The mountain is alive." The words reverberated through the valley, echoing multiple times off the rock walls. Soldiers looked at one another in fear, eyes wide. Horses balked, and commanders shouted frantic orders to restore cohesion. Idris tugged another rope, sending a cascade of small rocks down the slope. Each thud sounded like an attack, reinforcing the illusion. Soldiers dug for cover, some screaming, some shouting orders, but the fear had already rooted itself in their minds. Bayan released a final set of smoke pots. Thick, choking clouds poured down, mixing with dust and the morning haze. Shadows rose, stretched, and twisted, giving the impression of a massive force descending upon the Seljuk army from multiple angles. From their vantage point, Zara leaned in, voice tense. "This is working, but we cannot hold it forever. They will adapt." The fida'i's eyes never left the valley. "They will adapt, yes, but we control the first strike. We control their perception. We choose when fear strikes." Suddenly, a horn blared from the distant hills, reinforcements arriving faster than expected. Dust swirled on the horizon, forming the unmistakable shape of cavalry. "They come," Zara whispered. "More than before." The fida'i's jaw tightened. "Good. Let them arrive. Let them see shadows before steel. The mountain is patient. Patience is a weapon sharper than any sword." As the cavalry approached, the fida'i gestured for the team to prepare the final illusion for this encounter. Clay pots, rocks, whistles, and mirrors would converge to make the mountain seem alive. Every soldier, every horse, every banner would doubt what they saw. Hours passed in tense anticipation. The Seljuk commanders adjusted, shouting, coordinating. try to regain control, but the unseen forces above, the smoke, the shadows, the echoes, kept them off balance. Fear had taken root. The army moved like a wounded beast, careful and hesitant, unsure of every step. The fida'i felt the strain in his arms, the ache in his legs, the burn in his lungs. But he did not relent. Every shadow created, every sound manipulated, every rock tumbled was a stroke of survival, a defense of Alamut, a tribute to the order that had trained him. The wind carried distant shouts and the clatter of horse hooves. The mountains seemed to pulse beneath them, alive with potential energy, waiting to unleash the next phase of their strategy. And the fida'i, standing high above it all, whispered to the stones beneath his feet, "Alamut endures. We endure. Fear will guard us as steel cannot." The fida'i crouched behind a ridge, his eyes fixed on the valley below. The Seljuk army had grown larger, their ranks now filled with fresh cavalry and reinforcements that stretched the horizon. Dust rose like a living thing, signaling the relentless approach of men and horses alike. Yet even with their numbers, hesitation lingered in their movements, a subtle echo of the illusions they had already faced. Zara pointed toward the eastern ravine. "If we collapse the slope now, we can funnel their cavalry into the western pass. They'll be compressed, vulnerable." Bayan checked his ropes and clay pots. "I can trigger the slide from here. Timing is critical. One misstep, and the mountain may claim us instead of them." The fida'i nodded. "We are instruments, not pawns. Every boulder, every shadow, every breath we take is calculated. Move." They positioned themselves along the cliffs, hearts pounding, eyes scanning every detail. The wind carried faint sounds from the valley. Commands shouted, the clash of metal, the uneasy snorts of horses. The Seljuks moved carefully, aware now of unseen threats, but unaware of exactly where those threats would strike. Bayan gave a subtle nod. The fida'i responded with a flick of his wrist. A large boulder, perched precariously above the ravine, began its descent. The stone tumbled with a deep, grinding roar, striking smaller rocks and sending a cascade down the slope. Dust and debris shot into the air, blocking visibility and creating the illusion of a sudden landslide. Horses reared, soldiers stumbled, and the sound of chaos echoed through the valley. Whistles and echoes amplified by the cliffs created the impression of soldiers advancing from a mountainside. Shadows seemed to flicker along the edges of the smoke and dust, multiplying with each movement. The Seljuk commander shouted orders, trying to restore formation, but his voice was drowned by the noise of rock, dust, and terror. Men faltered, horses bolted, and the army began to fragment under the pressure of unseen forces. The fida'i moved along the ridge, signaling Idris and Bayan. More rocks tumbled, smoke flared, and sunlight reflected off mirrors to create the illusion of countless spears and armored men. Soldiers misjudged distance, collided with each other, and abandoned their positions. Zara whispered, "They'll retreat toward the center. That's where we can control them." The fida'i nodded, scanning the valley. "We guide them, not attack. Let fear lead them where we choose." The central column of the Seljuk army approached, cautious but relentless. The fida'i and his companions unleashed a symphony of illusions, rocks, smoke, mirrors, whistles, and shadows. Each element was designed to suggest movement, presence, and threat where there was none. The effect was immediate. The central column slowed, soldiers hesitant, eyes darting to the cliffs and ravines. Whispers of ambush spread, the panic infectious. Horses shied, men stumbled, and the army's once formidable cohesion began to unravel. Suddenly, a distant horn sounded, a call from the rear, signaling another approaching force. Dust and shadows combined, creating the impression of encirclement. The Seljuks were trapped not by steel, but by perception. Fear had become their greatest adversary. The fida'i crouched low, voice calm but commanding. "Patience. We control the rhythm. Every step they take is ours to guide. They will break where we choose." Hours passed in tense anticipation. The Seljuks pressed forward, only to falter repeatedly under pressure of smoke, shadow, and sound. Every false movement, every illusion of men descending from the cliffs, every echo of whistles created chaos. By midday, the army was visibly fractured. Small groups acted independently, some retreating, some advancing blindly. Confusion reigned supreme, and the fida'i strategy had bought critical time for the villages and for Alamut itself. Zara wiped sweat from her brow. We cannot hold this forever. Their commander will adapt, and when he does, he will not be fooled twice. The fida'i's eyes narrowed, scanning the valley below, calculating the next move. Then we must prepare. Every ridge, every cliff, every shadow will become a weapon. We fight with what they cannot see, what they cannot anticipate. Fear is sharper than any blade. Bai unsheathed his knives silently. Exhaustion is posture, but focus unwavering. They underestimate the mountain, and that will be their undoing. The wind carried the distant shouts, the clatter of hooves, and the echo of chaos through the cliffs. The mountain seemed to pulse beneath them, alive with potential, waiting to strike again. The fida'i drew a slow breath, feeling the weight of Alamut on his shoulders, the legacy of the order coursing through his veins. Every rock, every tree, every shadow was an ally, every heartbeat a weapon, and high above the valley, he whispered to the stones beneath his feet, "Alamut endures. We endure. Fear will guard us as steel cannot." The afternoon sun beat down mercilessly on the valley, turning the dust into a haze that clung to the Seljuk army like a shroud. From their positions above, the fida'i and his companions observed the enemy, noting every faltering step, every hesitant glance, every whisper of doubt spreading through their ranks. The mountain itself seemed to breathe with them, patient, deliberate, alive. Zara crouched behind a boulder, her eyes sharp. The cavalry is regrouping. They're trying to form a wedge to push through the western pass. If they succeed, the villages will be exposed. The fida'i's jaw tightened. Then we break the wedge. Not with swords, but with terror. Every boulder, every shadow, every sound becomes a weapon. Fear will fracture them before steel can. Bai and ready the remaining clay pots, fingers brushing over the cords attached to their triggers. We'll have only one chance. One slip, and the mountain becomes our prison instead of our ally. Idris nodded silently, adjusting his position to the ridge, overlooking the western path. He checked the alignment of rocks, ensuring each could tumble with maximum effect, each creating the illusion of movement, of men falling, of the mountain itself striking down on the enemy. The first scouts of the wedge entered the pass, moving cautiously, shields raised, eyes scanning every shadow. The fida'i signaled, a boulder released from Idris's ledge, tumbling down with a thunderous roar. Dust and small rocks followed, cascading in a chaotic symphony. Horses reared, men fell. An illusion of unseen warriors advancing from the cliffs took hold instantly. Smoke erupted from the slope as Bayan released the pots. Thick, choking clouds curled upward, obscuring vision and twisting sunlight into strange, threatening shapes. Shadows leapt across the cliffs, multiplying with each flicker. The wedge faltered. Horses bolted. Soldiers stumbled and collided. Fear became tangible, pressing down on every man like a physical weight. Zara's voice cut through the noise, sharp and precise. Drive them toward the center. Let the wedge crumble on its own. The fida'i moved silently along the ridge, signaling more rocks to tumble, more smoke to flare. Whistles echoed, seemingly from multiple directions, creating the impression of an army descending from the cliffs in waves. The wedge collapsed under the pressure, soldiers retreating, disorganized and terrified. From the central vantage point, the fida'i could see the commander trying to restore order. He spurred his horse forward, sword raised, shouting instructions, but his voice was swallowed by the chaos. The mountain's illusion had already taken root in the minds of his men. Every shadow, every sound, every tremor of falling rocks reinforced their fear. Hours dragged on. The Seljuk army pressed forward cautiously, only to falter repeatedly under the relentless psychological assault. Horses panicked, men shouted orders they could not enforce, and small groups became isolated, separated by smoke and dust. Finally, the commander realized the western pass was impassable. He signaled withdrawal toward the valley center, attempting to regroup his scattered forces. The fida'i and his companions remained in their positions, silent, calculating, ready for the next phase. Zara exhaled slowly. This buys time, but it is temporary. They will adapt, and when they do, they will not be so easily deceived. The fida'i's eyes scan the valley below, every ridge memorized, every shadow accounted for. Then we prepare. Every cliff, every boulder, every hidden path will become part of our defense. We fight not with steel alone, but with what they cannot see. Bayan sheathed his knives, exhaustion visible but resolve unbroken. The mountain is our ally and our advantage. The wind carried the distant clatter of hooves and voices. The valley was alive with movement, but the fida'i knew that the unseen forces of the mountain were even more powerful. Every misstep by the Seljuks reinforced their illusions, their fear, their vulnerability. Standing high above the valley, the fida'i whispered to the stones beneath his feet, "Alamut endures. We endure, and fear will protect us where swords cannot." The heat of the afternoon pressed down on the valley, thick with dust and tension. The Seljuk army, though battered and hesitant, was still formidable. From the cliffs above, the fida'i watched every movement, every shuffle of a boot, every falter of a horse. The mountain whispered possibilities to him, guiding his actions, shaping the battlefield with patience and precision. Zara leaned over a ledge, scanning the distant horizon. Their commander will not be fooled twice. He's learning from each hesitation, each panic. If we do not escalate, they will find a way through. The fida'i's eyes narrowed. Then we escalate, not with brute force alone, but with a full illusion of inevitability. We must make them question everything. Every shadow, every sound, every step. Bayan adjusted his pack, ensuring the remaining clay pots were ready. We can cut off their path through the western gorge entirely. One misstep, one collapse, and the wedge will fracture completely. Idris nodded silently, moving along the cliffside to prepare additional rock slides. Timing is critical. Too early and they'll regroup. Too late and it will be meaningless. The first scouts of the central column moved into the gorge, cautious but confident. The fida'i signaled. Rocks tumbled from Idris's ledge, crashing into smaller stones, creating a roaring cascade. Dust spiraled into the air, obscuring vision, and adding weight to the illusion of a collapsing slope. Horses reared, men shouted in panic, and the wedge faltered. Smoke erupted from Bayan's pots, thick and choking, twisting sunlight into threatening, impossible shapes. Shadows seemed to advance from every angle, multiplying and stretching across the cliffs. The Seljuk commander tried to maintain control, spurring his horse forward and shouting orders. But his men were hesitant, eyes wide with fear, ears straining for the unseen. Every sound, a rock tumbling, a whistle echoing from a cliff, amplified their terror. Zara's voice carried clearly. Push them toward the eastern ravine. Let the wedge collapse under its own weight. The fida'i gestured to Idris and Bayan. More rocks tumbled, more smoke flared, and whistles shrieked. The illusion of countless warriors descending from the cliffs became almost real in the minds of the soldiers below. The wedge faltered, then fractured. Horses bolted. Soldiers stumbled, some retreating in confusion, others frozen with fear. The central column struggled to maintain formation, but the mountain's illusions held them in check. Hours passed, tense and silent except for the echo of rock, smoke, and whistles. The Seljuk army was disoriented, fragmented, and hesitant. Each attempt to advance was met with the unseen way of the mountain, each decision second-guessed in the minds of men now haunted by shadows. Zara wiped dust from her face. We bought more time, but it will not last. They will adapt, and when they do, we must be ready. The fida'i's eyes scanned the valley, memorizing every ridge, every path, every boulder. Then we prepare for adaptation. Every shadow, every sound, every hidden path will become part of our strategy. We fight not only with what they see, but with what they cannot comprehend. Bayan sheathed his knives, exhaustion etched into his features, yet his resolve remained unwavering. The mountain is our ally, our shield, and our weapon. The distant echo of hooves and voices carried through the cliffs. The valley was alive with movement, but the fida'i knew the unseen forces of the mountain, rocks, shadows, echoes, were even more powerful. Every misstep by the Seljuks reinforced their own fear, making them prisoners of their perception. Standing high above the valley, the fida'i whispered to the stones beneath his feet, "Alamut endures. We endure. Fear will protect us where steel cannot. And today, the mountain speaks through us." The sun dipped lower, casting long shadows across the valley floor, and the Seljuk army, though still formidable, was beginning to show the strain of the mountain's relentless psychological assault. Dust clung to armor and fabric, swirling in the wind like restless spirits. From their high vantage point, the fida'i and their companions watched every movement with keen eyes, each twitch of a horse or hesitation of a soldier a testament to the subtle power of fear. Zara scanned the distant horizon, lips pressed tight. The commander is reorganizing. He's sending small detachments to probe the cliffs. If they find our hidden paths, everything we've done will be undone. The fida'i's gaze narrowed. Then we make the cliffs speak louder than their senses. Every rockfall, every echo, every shadow must convince them that the mountain itself rises against them. Bayan slung his satchel, checking the remaining clay pots and ropes. We can collapse the northern pass. One push, and their detachment will be trapped, isolated. Fear will do the rest. Idris silently adjusted his position along the ledge, lining up boulders with precise angles. Timing is everything. If it comes too soon, they'll regroup. Too late, and the opportunity is lost. The first scouts of the northern detachment moved cautiously along the narrow pass. The fida'i gave a subtle signal, and a boulder released, grinding and bouncing down the slope. Smaller rocks followed, creating a cascade that thundered like a stampede. Horses reared, men shouted. An illusion of an unseen force descending from the cliffs took hold instantly. Bayan triggered a smoke pot, thick black clouds rising and twisting in the wind, sunlight catching in strange, threatening angles. Shadows leapt and stretched along the rocks, giving the impression of a massive force advancing where none existed. The Seljuk commander tried to restore order, spurring his horse forward and shouting commands. But hesitation had rooted itself in the hearts of his soldiers. Every sound, rocks tumbling, whistles echoing, reinforced their fear. Zara's voice carried with sharp clarity. "Drive them toward the central column. Let the mountain corral them." The fida'i gestured to Idris and Bayan. More boulders tumbled, more smoke erupted, more echoes carried through the cliffs. Shadows twisted and danced, multiplying with every movement. The northern detachment faltered, soldiers retreating or freezing in terror, horses panicking, their formation splintered. Hours passed in tense anticipation. The Seljuk army attempted to advance, only to falter under the relentless assault of unseen forces. Every attempt to regain cohesion was met with the calculated chaos of rock, smoke, and shadow. Zara exhaled slowly, dust covering her face. "We've delayed them again, but it will not last. Their commander is learning from each failure. The next move must be decisive." The fida'i's eyes swept the valley, memorizing every ridge, every slope, every hidden path. Then we prepare. Every cliff, every stone, every shadow will be a weapon. We fight not only with steel, but with perception, with fear, with the mountain itself. Bayan sheathed his knives, exhaustion heavy on his shoulders, but determination unbroken. The mountain is alive, and today it fights for us. Wind carried the distant sounds of hooves, the clatter of armor, the echoes of shouted commands. The valley was alive with motion, but the unseen forces above, the cascading rocks, the twisting shadows, the resonating echoes, held power greater than any army could comprehend. The fida'i leaned over the cliff, whispering to the stones beneath his feet. "Alamut endures. We endure. Fear will guard us where steel cannot, and through the mountain we strike without lifting a sword." The evening sun cast long, bleeding shadows across the valley, turning the dust into a haze that seemed almost alive. The Seljuk army, though still formidable in number, moved with hesitation, every step measured and uncertain. From their high vantage point, the fida'i and his companions watched, reading the movements of men and horses, as if tracing the lines of a delicate map. Zara leaned over a jagged rock, her voice low and tense. "The commander is concentrating his forces in the central ridge. They're preparing for a decisive push. If they succeed, the villages are lost. The fida'i's eyes sharpened. Then we prepare the mountain's voice. Every stone, every shadow, every echo must speak louder than their confidence. Let fear be the first to strike. Bayan adjusted the ropes of his remaining clay pots. Checking each trigger, we can collapse the southern pass. If timed right, it will block their path and force the central column to hesitate. Their own fear will break them before steel does. Idris silently moved along the cliffside, lining boulders with painstaking care, calculating angles and trajectories. One misstep, one misjudgment, and the mountain claims us. Precision is our ally. The first scouts entered the southern pass cautiously. The fida'i gave the signal. A massive boulder released, thundering down the slope and striking smaller rocks. The cascade roared, dust and debris erupting like a storm. Horses reared, men shouted, and the illusion of an overwhelming force descending from the cliffs gripped the soldiers' minds. Bayan triggered smoke pots, thick clouds curling upward, distorting sunlight, creating shifting shapes that seemed alive. Shadows stretched and twisted, appearing as hundreds of unseen warriors advancing. The Seljuk commander spurred his horse forward, shouting orders, trying to impose control. But hesitation had rooted deep. Fear had taken hold. Every sound, the tumbling rocks, the echoing whistles, reinforced the illusion of insurmountable danger. Zara's sharp voice cut through the chaos, pushed them toward the northern ridge. Let the mountain guide them. The fida'i signaled Idris and Bayan in unison. More boulders fell, more smoke erupted, and whistles shrieked across the cliffs. Shadows multiplied, twisting across rocks and dust. The southern detachment faltered, men retreating in panic, horses bolting, formation collapsing under the psychological weight of the illusions. Hours dragged on, each moment tense, each breath measured. The Seljuk army attempted to advance, only to falter again and again. Every misstep was magnified, every hesitation exploited. Rocks, smoke, shadows, and echoes orchestrated the mountain's silent symphony. Zara wiped sweat and dust from her brow. We've delayed them, but the commander adapts quickly. The next move must be decisive. We cannot rely on illusions alone. The fida'i scanned the valley, memorizing every path, every slope, every ridge. Then we prepare. Every cliff, every stone, every shadow becomes part of our strategy. We fight not only with steel, but with perception, with fear, with the mountain itself. Bayan sheathed his knives, exhaustion etched across his face, but resolve unbroken. The mountain protects us, and today it speaks through our hands. The distant echoes of hooves and shouted commands carried through the cliffs. The valley teemed with motion, but the unseen forces above, the rocks, shadows, and echoes, wielded power stronger than any army's swords. Standing high above it all, the fida'i whispered to the stones beneath his feet, "Alamut endures. We endure. Fear will strike where steel cannot, and through the mountain, victory is forged unseen." The twilight deepened over the valley, painting the cliffs in deep purples and reds, and casting long, jagged shadows across the Seljuk lines. The army, still formidable in number, was visibly frayed. Hesitation and fear marked every movement. Every soldier's footfall carried a weight of doubt. From the ridges above, the fida'i and his companions observed intense silence, attuned to every twitch, every glance, every falter. Zara whispered, her eyes scanning the valley floor. They're reorganizing once more, concentrating around the central approach. If they break through here, the villages are exposed and defenseless. The fida'i's jaw tightened. Then we make the cliff speak. Every stone, every shadow, every echo must convince them the mountain itself fights them. Fear must strike before steel. Bayan tightened his grip on the ropes of the clay pots. We collapse the western ridge this time. The path is narrow. One misstep, one misjudgment, and their advance crumbles entirely. Idris moved along the jagged ledge, positioning boulders with careful precision. Every stone must fall exactly as planned. Too soon they adjust. Too late, and we lose the advantage. The first scouts of the central column crept forward, moving cautiously along the path. The fida'i gave a subtle signal. A massive boulder began its descent, thunderous as it tumbled down, striking smaller rocks and creating a cascade of sound and dust. Horses reared, men shouted in alarm, and the illusion of an advancing force of unseen warriors took root in their minds. Bayan released smoke pots. Thick clouds rose and twisted with the wind. Sunlight caught in strange angles, casting shifting, threatening shapes across the cliffs. Shadows stretched, twisted, and multiplied, as if hundreds of unseen soldiers advanced from above. The Seljuk commander spurred his horse forward, shouting orders to restore cohesion. But hesitation had rooted itself deep within his men. Every sound, the tumbling rocks, the echoing whistles, the distant cries, reinforced the illusion of an overwhelming, inescapable threat. Zara's voice pierced the chaos. Drive them toward the eastern ravine. Let the mountain guide them. The fida'i signaled Idris and Bayan in unison. More boulders fell, more smoke erupted, more echoes carried down the cliffs. Shadows multiplied and shifted, twisting across rocks and dust. The central detachment faltered, men retreating, horses bolting, formation crumbling under the psychological assault. Hours passed in tense anticipation. The Seljuk army attempted to advance, only to stumble, retreat, or freeze under the relentless orchestration of rock, smoke, shadows, and echoes. Every misstep amplified, every hesitation exploited. Zara wiped her brow, her face streaked with dust. We've delayed them again, but the commander learns fast. Our next move must be decisive. Illusions alone will not win this. The fida'i's gaze swept the valley. Every ridge, every slope, every hidden path memorized, every movement anticipated. Then we prepare. Every cliff, every stone, every shadow becomes a weapon. We fight not just with steel, but with perception, with fear, with the mountain itself. Bayan sheathed his knives, exhaustion etched across his posture, but resolve unbroken. The mountain fights with us, and today it will speak through every shadow, every sound, every stone. Wind carried distant hooves and the echoes of shouted commands through the cliffs. The valley was alive with movement, yet the unseen forces, the boulders, shadows, and echoes, wielded a power stronger than any army's swords. High above, the fida'i whispered to the stones beneath his feet. Alamut endures. We endure. Fear will strike where steel cannot. And through the mountain, victory is forged unseen. Night was falling, and the valley was draped in shadows so deep they seemed to swallow sound itself. The Seljuk army, though numerous, was fractured and tense, every step uncertain, every command questioned. From their high vantage point, the fida'i and his companions moved silently along the ridges, listening to the valley as though it spoke secrets only they could understand. Zara's voice was low but urgent. They're concentrating around the central approach again. The commander is preparing a decisive strike. If they succeed, the villages fall, and everything we've fought for is lost. The fida'i's eyes narrowed. Then the mountain must speak louder than their steel. Every rockfall, every shadow, every echo must convince them they are already defeated. Fear becomes a weapon we wield tonight. Bayan checked the remaining clay pots. Their triggers ready. We collapse the northern ravine this time. Timing is everything. One wrong move, and the mountain will claim us as much as them. Idris adjusted his position on a jagged ledge, carefully aligning boulders for maximum effect. Every stone must fall precisely. Too early, and they adjust. Too late, and the advantage is lost. The first scouts of the central column crept forward cautiously. The fida'i gave the signal. A massive boulder released, roaring down the slope and striking smaller rocks in its path. The cascade thundered through the ravine, dust and debris spiraling into the night air. Horses reared, men shouted. An illusion of unseen warriors advancing from the cliffs took hold. Bayan triggered the smoke pots, thick clouds curling and twisting in the moonlight, creating shifting shapes that seemed alive. Shadows leapt and multiplied, giving the impression of hundreds of soldiers descending upon the Seljuks from impossible angles. The Seljuk commander tried to regain control, spurring his horse forward and shouting orders. But fear had already rooted itself in his men. Every sound, the tumbling rocks, the echoing whistles, the shifting shadows, reinforce the illusion of an unstoppable force. Zara's voice cut through the chaos. Drive them toward the western ridge. Let the mountain decide their path. The fida'i gestured to Idris and Bayan. More boulders fell, more smoke erupted, more echoes carried across the cliffs. Shadows twisted, stretching across the rocks, multiplying with every movement. The central column faltered, men retreating in panic, horses bolting, formations breaking under the psychological pressure. Hours passed in tense anticipation. The Seljuk army attempted to advance, only to stumble, hesitate, or retreat under the relentless orchestration of rocks, smoke, shadows, and echoes. Every hesitation amplified their fear, every misstep magnified by the mountain's silent command. Zara exhaled, her face streaked with sweat and dust. We've delayed them again, but this cannot last. Their commander will adapt. The final move must be decisive. The fida's gaze swept the valley, memorizing every slope, every ridge, every hidden path. Then we prepare. Every cliff, every stone, every shadow becomes a weapon. We fight not only with steel, but with perception, with fear, with the mountain itself. Bayan sheathed his knives, exhaustion clear but determination unwavering. The mountain fights with us. Tonight, it speaks through every shadow, every sound, every stone. The distant echo of hooves, the clash of armor, and shouted commands carried through the cliffs. The valley was alive with movement, but the unseen forces, the rocks, shadows, and echoes, wielded power greater than any army's swords. High above the valley, the fida'i whispered to the stones beneath his feet. Alamut endures. We endure. Fear will strike where steel cannot. And through the mountain, victory is forged unseen. Dawn broke over the valley, painting the rugged cliffs in a cold, pale light. The Seljuk army, once formidable and confident, now moved like shadows of men, hesitant, fractured, haunted by the mountain and the unseen forces that had controlled their every step. Silence hung heavy, broken only by the distant clatter of broken carts, an occasional cry of a horse. The fida'i stood atop the highest ridge, surveying the aftermath. Dust still rose from scattered rocks, and smoke curls lingered in the air, ghosts of the night's illusions. Soldiers huddled, some tending to the wounded, others trying in vain to rally their remaining forces. Fear had done what swords alone could not. It had shattered their cohesion, and in that fracture lay survival for Alamut. Zara approached, voice quiet but firm. It's over, for now. They'll retreat, and Alamut stands. The fida'i's gaze swept the valley one last time. Not over, but survived. Every shadow, every echo, every rock we moved, it was all a lesson in fear and courage, in strategy and patience. Bayan rested his hands on his knees, breathing heavily. They'll speak of this night for generations, an army undone without a single direct blow from our hands. Idris nodded silently, eyes reflecting both exhaustion and relief. We protected our home, our people, but at what cost? The fida'i let the wind carry his words down to the valley below. Courage is not in the absence of fear, but in action despite it. Sacrifice is never without weight. And the cost of war is measured not just in bodies, but in the minds it changes, the hearts it steals, and the silence it leaves behind. The first rays of sunlight touched the cliffs, illuminating the faces of the fida'i and his companions. Every muscle ached, every breath burned, but the mountain had protected them, and their training had made the unseen tangible, the impossible real. Zara spoke softly, almost to herself. They underestimated the mountain. They underestimated us. And that is why we endure. The fida'i turned to look at the horizon, the valley below still filled with shadows of the night's illusions, now harmless remnants of fear. Alamut endures. We endure. And in every rock, every shadow, every whisper wind, the legacy of the order lives. Fear can be a weapon. Courage can be a shield. And through them, survival is forged. A deep silence settled over the valley, as if the mountain itself had exhaled. The cost had been great, the night long, but Alamut remained, its walls unbroken, its people alive, its defenders unbowed. The fida'i glanced at his companions, voice calm but resolute. Remember this night. Remember what fear can do, what courage can achieve, and what it costs to protect what you hold sacred. History will remember, but so must we. And as the sun climbed higher, illuminating the cliffs in the valley below, the fida'i whispered to the wind, Alamut endures, and through it we endure.